Greetings and welcome to selfgovernanceU.com. I wanted to come to you today to speak to you about the law and how important it is to comprehend what's truly going on globally, internationally, if you will. So again, I'm just learning this program, so bear with me. selfgovernanceU.com, and of course, my name is Derek, and we're going to get started here today. If you don't teach them God's truth, Satan will gladly deceive them with his lies. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Thou shalt not take the name of thy Lord God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. Honor thy mother and father. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against our fellow brothers and sisters, no matter what title you operate through. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his earthly possessions. There comes a time when people have to recognize who works at these buildings, why do they meet here, what's their objective. Most people have a misconception that these people that work at this facility are members of a government, a de jure government. They are not. In fact, they are self-serving officers of a commercial corporation found under Title 28, 3002, 15A, which is a federal corporation with a 10 square mile area identified as Washington, D.C., which is a single individual unit on its own, just like the Vatican, Vatican City, and so forth. So when we start to look at this, who meets here? Well, it's self-serving members of a private corporation who seek to unjustly enrich themselves by implicating statutes, codes, city ordinances, and provisions that only apply to them and the people that volunteer to participate in their schemes. All right? We as men are not subservient to other men. Okay? We can only be subservient to one master. And the master that I choose to be subservient to is our heavenly creator, okay? Who gave his only begotten son to liberate us of our sins. Sins and debt are synonymous, ladies and gentlemen, okay? What do they do at this building? Well, most people believe that at this building that they represent all the people living in the country and that they're doing the good works of our Heavenly Father and administering the grace of God. But in truth, when we start to look at things as they unfold, we have all kinds of scandals that are coming out in the news media today. Social media, news media, you name it. All these scandals are coming out. But these scandals have been coming out for hundreds of years, ladies and gentlemen. You can change the name of the pig all day long. It's still a pig, all right? And so what do there? They think up ways to extort money, your labor, your offspring. They think of ways on how to legally justify it politically, make it sound correct, how to extort you, all right? Which is theft by taking, which is not only unlawful, it's illegal. Do they help you in any way? The answer is no, absolutely not. They help themselves and not you. They pass all these statutes, codes, city ordinances, and provisions that quite frankly don't apply to you. That's reality. And yet, because we are indoctrinated in public school systems where the legislator writes the curriculum, remember, legislators are lawyers, ladies and gentlemen, esquires, which have been removed from this country twice in history, okay? For the nefarious activity, their manipulation of language, the attorning of rights and property, and thus nobody could trust them. They were vermin, rats in the woodpile, lying, looting, pandering pieces of shit. All right? Today, these same people that make these statutes, codes, city ordinances, provisions, employ policy enforcers. That's right. policy enforcers. They don't uphold the law, ladies and gentlemen, and we're about to get into it. I want you to understand the fundamental principles of your right to locomotion in your private household consumer goods, to effectually, out of necessity, live and do the good works of the Creator as intended. This is about liberty. It's about freedom, ladies and gentlemen. It is about the lawful and unlawful means by which government acts in depriving an individual of his liberty. History teaches that deprivation of liberty is more often arbitrary and unlawful than it is otherwise. At least this is always the tendency of those who hold executive power, all right? And the only way they hold executive power is by consent of the governed. And in order to be governed, government is control of the mind. You have to render yourself incompetent, ladies and gentlemen. Daniel Webster once stated this problem in these words: "The contest for the ages has been to rescue liberty from the grasp of the executive power. Liberty is taken away or deprived most commonly by arrest and imprisonment. The practice is easy arrest and secret imprisonment has always been an earmark of a despotic executive power. To compound this problem, we have the legislative mills which turn out thousands of new laws every year. But these, ladies and gentlemen, are not laws. They're statutes, codes, city ordinances, and provisions. Rules, but not law. When we look at what they're doing, ladies and gentlemen, they're creating a facade that's so great, people over time have believed it. You see, what is the definition for a code? A code is something that is intentionally made so it has to be deciphered. Well, is law something that is deciphered? No, law is self-evident, ladies and gentlemen. Thou shalt not murder is positive law. It's unanimous worldwide across the board. All right? But not everybody knows, nor does everybody in the world believe that one has to have a license in order to move from point A to point B in their modern day conveyance. In fact, there's a lot of countries, none of that is required. For you will find many countries throughout the world that have no laws at all. No statutes, no codes, no city ordinances, no provisions. But you will never find a country without maxims, because they're the very principles and essence of law. The passion of modern legislators to regulate every facet of the most intimate corners of everyday life is notorious for those who consent to it. This would be oppressive enough if administered under the requirements of a warrant or summons. But it becomes doubly intolerable if every zealous officer is authorized to arrest on sight every person who detects breaking one of these alleged laws, which we've already covered are just statutes, city ordinances, provisions, and rules. They're not law. No one can be safe to leave their home or to travel about for fear of being subject to thousands of unknown alleged laws in which he could be instantly arrested or detained. People no longer live their whole lives in a village in which they were born. They pass freely from place to place and in transit go through innumerable towns and villages. The risk of being arrested on sight because one's conduct contravenes some regulation which the wisdom of the local salon deems necessary is appalling to any thinking person. It would be impossible to know at what moment one might become susceptible to being arrested or accosted against their will based upon somebody else's belief of a law applying to them. A revolution in England and a revolution of the American colonies are said to have high authorities, are said by high authorities to have been largely influenced by promiscuous seizure and searches of persons and property. Unlawful detainment, people, is what we're talking about. The history of our famous ancestors over the centuries teaches that a people cannot be free where executive power can arbitrarily arrest or imprison men and women, or ransack at will the properties of the people. The executive power is limited and guided by the law. By the law of the land, by due process of law. If it was a restriction upon the King of England, it must be so for every petty officer. In many of the treaties on the law pertaining to the rights of men and women, and in many of the older and better court cases, we find the declaration, "The law is very jealous of the liberty of the men and women." What law is it that so regards liberty? It is the common law of I, the common law of you, all right? Do no harm, trespass not, don't bear false witness against your fellow brothers and sisters, right? It's the law common to everybody. Now, common law has been perverted into the Roman curia courts, all right? The Roman circus, the Colosseum, if you will. Common law in America after 1935 is law common to the judges, not law common to man, okay? And when we're talking about law common to judges, we're talking about statutes, codes, city ordinances, and provisions to increase the public coffers and unjustly enrich themselves for their retirement. It has nothing to do with justice anymore. One who interferes with another's liberty does so at his own peril. This law also prescribes how arrests are to be made and the restrictions involved. What constitutes a false imprisonment? False imprisonments consist of any type of unlawful restraint or interference with the personal freedom of an individual, a man or woman. It basically involves any unlawful violation of liberty of another. All right, the ancient English legal scholar Henry D. Brockton, from 1200 to 1268, tells us that false imprisonment is one of the oldest violations known to mankind. Forcefully to deprive a man of freedom to go wheresoever he may is clearly a trespass against his unalienable rights. False imprisonment was indeed one of the first trespasses recognized by the common law. False imprisonment is classified as a tort under the common law and also as a crime. It has been labeled as a tort, a trespass, an assault, a wrong, a damage, and an injury, giving one cause to bring suit against another for a remedy. Depriving a person of their liberty is legally no different than depriving a person of their property. Why? Because without unalienable rights, there is no such thing as property, and without property, there is no such thing as unalienable rights. A theft of liberty is a wrong by which remedy can be had, just as is the case with the theft of property. False imprisonment is a great offense due to the high regard the law has for liberty. In chitty practice of law, it states, "The infraction of personal liberty has ever been regarded as one of the greatest injuries. The injuries to liberty and freedom, and principally termed false imprisonments or malicious prosecution. Unlawful detention or deprivation of liberty is the basis of an action for the tort of false imprisonment. Actual seizure or laying hands is not necessary to constitute an unlawful detention, ladies and gentlemen. Thus, the only essential element, the only one that is required of the action are 1. Detention or restraint against one's will, and 2. Unlawfulness of such detention or restraint." In his treatise on the law of torts, Judge Cooley states, "False imprisonment is a wrong akin to the wrongs of assault and battery, and consists in imposing, by force or threats, an unlawful restraint upon a man's freedom of locomotion." Not your right to travel, ladies and gentlemen. Your freedom, your unalienable right of locomotion in today's modern day conveyances, absent a crime, absent an injured party, shall absolutely constitute, all right, a false imprisonment, a restraint on one man's freedom. When a man doesn't wish to be in a certain location and another man says that he must remain, that's an unlawful detention. That's an arrest. That's a breach of public policy. It's a breach of their fiduciary duty. It's a breach of public trust, ladies and gentlemen. Blackstone, in his commentaries on law, states on this matter, every confinement of the person is an imprisonment, whether it be in a common prison or in a private house or in the stocks or even by forcibly detaining one in the public streets. Doesn't need four walls. It doesn't require four walls. It doesn't require an automobile to be for you to be placed in to constitute an unlawful arrest and detainment. Thus, any type of detainment or confinement of a person or restriction or deprivation of their liberty, freedoms, and basic rights of locomotion, where he is compelled to remain where he does not wish to remain, or to go where he does not wish to go, is an imprisonment. The only question thereafter is whether or not the imprisonment is false. The word false comes from the common law and is synonymous with unlawful. A false arrest is one means of committing a false imprisonment. In describing false imprisonment as being the unlawful restraint of the liberty and freedom of the man or woman, or of the primary right of freedom of locomotion, the Supreme Court of Idaho has also stated, imprisonment is any restraint of the personal liberty of another and prevention of his movement from place to place or his free action according to his own pleasure and free will. It is false imprisonment when this is done without lawful authority. Ladies and gentlemen, without being indicted by a federal grand jury, a warrant issued, signed by a judge with an affidavit in support of the man, woman, or alleging an injury, harm, damage that you have caused, they have absolutely zero authority to accost you against your will. Zero. None. And are absolutely personally liable for their action, for all men are responsible for knowing the law, and ignorance of the law excuses no one. All right? For we're all responsible for knowing the contracts we enter into. In reviewing several textbook definitions on false imprisonment, the Supreme Court of North Carolina stated, false imprisonment is the unlawful and total restraint of one man or woman's liberty and freedom of the person. The imprisonment is false in the sense of being unlawful. The rights violated by this tort is freedom of locomotion. There's your claim, ladies and gentlemen. My unalienable rights to freedom of locomotion were impeded by an agent and agency who acted under color of authority, which completely negates his alleged association with doing things in good faith, causing a man, harm. It belongs historically to the class of rights known as simple or primary rights. The theory of law is that one interferes with the freedom of locomotion of another at his own peril, meaning personally liable, not generally liable. A rather complete description of what does and does not constitute false imprisonment was given by the Supreme Court of Kansas as follows. False imprisonment is necessarily a wrongful interference with the personal liberty and freedom of an individual. The wrong may be committed by words alone, or by acts alone, or by both, and by merely operating on the will of the individual, or by personal violence, or by both, harm, bodily injury, threat, duress, and coercion, trespass by way of attempted extortion. It is not necessary that the individual be confined within a prison or within walls, or that he be assaulted or even touched. Do you understand what I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen? You don't even have to be physically assaulted for a false imprisonment to occur. It is not necessary that there should be any injury done to the individual's person or to his character or reputation, nor is it a requirement necessary that the wrongful act be committed with malice or ill will, or even with the slightest wrongful intention, which means whether the intention was pure, good of heart, or whether it was with malice, it makes no difference. A false imprisonment is a false imprisonment. A restriction on your right to locomotion to travel from point A to point B in your modern day conveyance is in fact a crime, is in fact a restriction of your locomotion. All that is necessary is that the individual be restrained of his liberty and freedom without any sufficient legal or lawful cause thereof, or therefore, and by words or acts which he fears to disregard. If you don't do this, I'm going to take you to jail. Is that a threat? Yes, it is. Is jail worse than where I'm at now? Yes, it is. So you're going to take me to a place I don't wish to be? You're going to continue to hold me against my will and force me into a contract? Well, it's not a contract, but you need to sign this. Well, if it's not a contract, then why would I need to sign it? Are you forcing me against my will to participate in a false artifice and scheme to unjustly enrich your principal? This seems like a false imprisonment to me. False imprisonment exists not only by words or acts that one fears to disregard, but also by such acts and measures that he cannot disregard for fear of death, right? You might be shot by a gun-toting moron if you tell him to fly a kite. Boy, how lost is America? There used to be a time and a day where if you acted unrighteously as an officer of the law, you might just get your ass handed to you on the side of the road. Nowadays, you can't even do that because you might be shot by these gun-toting morons who really don't understand their oath of office, who've never read the Constitution, who don't understand that everything is contract. No fear of disobedience need to exist. If someone causes a situation that makes it impossible for another to exercise their liberty or locomotion, it is, in fact, undeniably an imprisonment. And not only is it an imprisonment, ladies and gentlemen, it is a false imprisonment. False imprisonment is the name of the category for those torts that unlawfully deprive or interfere with the liberty of a man or a woman. Under this category, the unlawful arrest is the most common type of wrong committed today, ladies and gentlemen. It happens every day, day in and day out. Another common way in which a wrong of this nature occurs is by the unlawful detention of a person in a room, a jail, or other location. Definitions of false imprisonment usually come from unlawful restraint of this nature. False imprisonment has been well defined to be a trespass committed by one man against another man, okay? And it doesn't matter what their titles are, ladies and gentlemen. A man was caused harm by another man who sometimes acts in the capacity of sheriff, okay? By unlawfully arresting him and detaining him without any legal authority. Legal or lawful authority. Remember, the only time I agree with legal is when it's in harmony lawfully. When legal and lawful are in harmony, then I agree with it. For example, it is unlawful to murder somebody. It is also illegal to murder somebody. Consequently, I agree with both legal and lawful being in harmony. It's one instance that I can point out clear as day where legal and lawful are harmonious, and I agree with that because it's the law. The law sets such a high value upon the freedom of men and women that even an attempt to unlawfully arrest is esteemed a great provocation. All the authorities agree that an arrest may be made either with or without any physical force or actual touching by the officer. Thus, any illegal restraint of one's personal freedom and liberty by the act of another gives that person a cause of action for false imprisonment against the one causing the illegal restraint. Okay? The illegal and unlawful restraint. Prima facie, any restraint put by fear or force is unlawful. False imprisonment is necessarily a wrong interference with the personal liberty and freedom of a man or a woman, usually made by an arrest. And physical custody or restraint is not essential to the effectuation of an arrest. So if an officer tells a person that he is under arrest and he thereupon submits himself to the officer, going with him and obeying his orders, such person is deprived of his liberty and freedom. And if the act of the officer is unlawful, it is a false imprisonment. In all cases in which there is no physical touching or seizure, nor any resistance, the intentions of the man or woman to the transaction are to be considered. In such a case, there must have been intent on the part of one of them to arrest or restrain the other, and intent on the part of such other to submit. Under the belief and imprisonment that submission was necessary, the following definitions will provide further insight into the nature and elements of false imprisonment. False imprisonment is the unlawful restraint by one person, one man or woman, don't care what their titles are. It's another man or woman that bleeds red at the end of the day, absent a victim, holding you against your will, accosting you for a statute, code, city ordinance, provision, if you will, which is not law, of the physical liberty or freedom of another, and has here used the word false, seems to be synonymous with unlawful. Any exercise of force or expressed or implied threat or of force by which in fact the other person is deprived of his liberty and freedom, compelled to remain where he does not wish to remain. It's important. Am I being compelled to remain where I do not wish to remain? Officer, hey, a question. What's your name? R. Steinbeck. Okay, R. Steinbeck, are you using a false and deceptive unregistered DBA, doing business as, to instruct me through way of title to strip me of my unalienable rights on the side of the road today? No, I'm not. Am I being detained? Well, you're not free to go. So this is a false imprisonment. I'm not free to go under threat, duress, and coercion. If I move my private household consumer good, you are going to react in a way that is either violent or may cause me harm, injury, damage, or loss. Is that correct? Yeah, well, you're not free to go. You're not free to go. Okay, so this is a false imprisonment at this point, and now I'm going to conduct my own investigation. You have the right to remain silent. You have a right to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one may or may not be appointed to you depending on how screwed up your legal system is. But here's the facts. You're accosting me against my will based on a belief that you have the authority to tell another man what to do. And you're a man and I'm a man. What gives you that authority absent a victim? You see how this works, ladies and gentlemen? If you want to learn more, please join us at selfgovernanceu.com. And again, we are the enforcers, ladies and gentlemen. We are the enforcers here. You got to learn the law. You've got to learn your unalienable rights. Remember, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. And there's a Roman maxim that says, let he who wishes to remain ignorant continue to be ignorant. All right? And I'm tired of watching the ignorant masses walk around without any true guidance. This is not stuff you're learning on news media. This is not curriculum that you're learning in high school, grade school, or anywhere else for that matter. All right, stay tuned. My next video is going to be about lying, looting, pandering lawyers. You heard me right. And why you can't afford to hire one. Okay? So thanks for joining me. I look forward to seeing you guys at selfgovernanceu.com. Check us out. More videos, more content, teaching you how to have proper standing and assert yourself in a manner that's conducive for prevailing. Remember, our only intent is to do things in good faith with good conscience for good reason, all right? And to do the good works of our Heavenly Father. That's our intent and purpose. We wish no ill will, no harm, and we damn sure don't want to bring false accusations against people, right? And strip them of their titles. The title of police officer cannot hurt you. Police officer is nothing more than a title. However, a man acting as a police officer, that man can cause you harm, injury, damage, or loss, and that man, therefore, is personally liable for his trespass.